On Christmas Eve, a young woman was forcibly taken from the apartment she shared with her boyfriend. An unknown assailant tied up the young man and, right before his eyes, led the woman out the back door, disappearing with her without a trace. The police were unable to identify the assailant, and the case went cold for 36 years until the unexpected truth finally came to light. Leslie McCray was born on April 14, 1968, in Jacksonville, Florida. She was responsive, determined, and open with people. She loved to have fun and was known for her sharp mind and wonderful sense of humor. Leslie grew up in a loving family, but was especially close to her cousin Joey, who was 4 years younger. Even though the girls lived in different cities, they tried to spend as much time together as possible. Leslie even considered moving to Joey's city when she turned 18. After finishing school at 17, she enrolled at the University of North Florida, dreaming of a future career in modeling. She moved out of her parents' home and settled in an apartment complex with her boyfriend, 21-year-old Edgar McCurry. On the night of December 24, 1985, Christmas Eve, they were asleep in their apartment. Around 3 a.m., Leslie's boyfriend woke up to a noise. When he opened his eyes, he was horrified to see a man with a sharp object standing over their bed. Seeing that Edgar was awake, the unknown assailant tied his hands and feet with neckties, threatening him with the object to prevent resistance. After that, he tied up Leslie in the same way and led her out the back door of the apartment. The bound boyfriend could only watch in horror, unable to stop the assailant. It took him 3 hours to free his hands, and around 6 a.m., he called the police. Detectives arrived at their apartment, took Edgar's statement, and began searching for the young woman. Given that the room was in almost complete darkness at the time of the incident, the boyfriend couldn't make out the assailant's face or any other details. The only thing he could recall was that the assailant had brown hair. The police also didn't know what kind of car he had, although it was clear the assailant used some form of transport for this. While detectives were trying to find witnesses and canvassing the streets, a call came into the station. 3 hours after the incident, a man out for a morning jog noticed a young woman lying in a ditch near the road, about 5 miles from Leslie's apartment. Investigators arrived at the location and immediately identified the young woman. Her condition indicated severe trauma, and parts of her clothing were torn or missing. Medical experts determined she had sustained over 20 injuries from a sharp object, and she also had numerous abrasions. Furthermore, the assailant had subjected her to an attack. Given that DNA analysis wasn't used in those years, this evidence couldn't help police identify a suspect. No other useful leads were found at the location where she was discovered, so investigators decided to focus on examining the victim's apartment. Soon, they had serious doubts about what happened that night. According to the victim's boyfriend, the assailant had snuck into their apartment, yet no signs of forced entry were found, and there were no signs of a struggle in the rooms. Furthermore, the back door through which Leslie was allegedly taken was covered in cobwebs. No prints were found on it, and there were no shoe tracks nearby, despite a thick layer of dust. All of this suggested the boyfriend's story might be fabricated, and if so, it raised an obvious question. Was he himself involved in what happened? But there were nuances to this theory. Investigators doubted the boyfriend would have had time to take his girlfriend out, commit the act, and then return to the apartment and call the police. Experts theorized that she was left on the street after Edgar had already called 911, so he was ruled out as a suspect. For the next several months, detectives tried to find new leads, but hit a dead end every time. The investigation was officially suspended in 1986. The assailant's biological material, which was the only serious piece of evidence, couldn't help investigators at the time, and they hoped this lead would one day point them to the person responsible. For many years, the case file collected dust in the archives, but Leslie's relatives never lost hope of finding the person responsible. They reached out to various agencies and independently gathered information that might be useful. However, their resources were limited, and they couldn't find any new leads. In 2010, Leslie's mother, Sarah Adams, was diagnosed with a serious neurological condition that left her almost unable to speak. Despite this, she continued to stay in contact with investigators, communicating with them via notes. After that, Leslie's cousin, Joey, became the most active fighter for the truth. Even though Joey lived with her family 2 hours away from Jacksonville, she regularly traveled there to speak with investigators or help Leslie's mother. However, their attempts to reach the police led almost nowhere. Detectives were not eager to reopen the investigation, given the lack of new evidence. Moreover, they were busy with current cases and were not in a hurry to take on a decades-old case. As a result, Joey began to accuse the detectives of being negligent during the initial investigation, or even of covering for the assailant. She even suggested the assailant might have paid off investigators, but she had no proof of this. Joey also regularly gave interviews to local news channels, trying to bring public attention to the case. She reminisced about the time spent with her older cousin and described what a cheerful and positive person Leslie was. The woman also expressed regret that her 2 children would never know what a wonderful Aunt Leslie could have been to them. In late 2018, her family's persistent efforts yielded their first results. They contacted representatives of the Project Cold Case, who took an interest in Leslie's case. This nonprofit organization, which began in 2015, focused on unsolved cases where police had failed to find those responsible. The organization gathers and disseminates information, building dialogue with investigators and the media. They also provide support to the families of victims, advising them on how to communicate with police and journalists. The organization's staff posted information about Leslie's case on various platforms, trying to draw as much attention as possible. In cases like this, where investigators fail to find answers, public interest can play a key role. First, the more people who hear about this incident, the greater the chance that potential witnesses might be among them. Sometimes, people might have seen or heard something without realizing its significance, but it could lead police to the assailant. Second, pressure from the public and the media increased the likelihood that detectives would resume the investigation. They had the assailant's biological material in storage all this time, but they needed to reopen the case to study it. Often, police don't do this due to a lack of personnel or funding. The organization worked with Leslie's family for several months, and they truly succeeded in bringing attention to the case. It was written about in the news and featured in reports. And in June 2019, representatives from a popular local TV channel approached the family. They offered to record a major interview where the family could talk about Leslie and their long-standing efforts to find the truth. Her cousin and mother accepted the offer and met with journalists. They told them what kind of person Leslie was, showed her photos, and lamented the fact that the police hadn't worked on the case for over 30 years. Furthermore, in the interview, the relatives mentioned that they believed Leslie's boyfriend was the one responsible. In their opinion, his story about the man with the sharp object wasn't credible, and the young man could have harmed her himself. However, the journalist decided to cut this part, as Edgar was not a suspect in the case, and there was no evidence against him. The TV station representatives contacted the sheriff's office, hoping to get additional information, but the police declined to comment. They cited rules prohibiting them from discussing cases with journalists that were not currently active. Leslie's family was disappointed by this outcome, but they weren't going to give up. Joey continued to write letters to investigators, demanding the case be reopened, and eventually, it paid off. The family finally managed to organize a meeting with law enforcement representatives, and the detectives indicated their intention to revive the investigation. Leslie's relatives were re-interviewed, and the police began to re-examine the evidence. In April 2020, they sent the assailant's biological material, found on the victim, to the lab, and experts soon extracted a DNA profile. It was entered into the National FBI database and immediately got a match. Almost 35 years later, investigators finally had the name of the possible assailant. It turned out to be 58-year-old David Nelson Austin. After examining his background, detectives found many interesting details. His DNA was in the FBI database for a reason. Since 1991, the man had been serving time for 2 serious assaults committed in '88 and '90. At that time, he was living in Michigan, having moved from Florida. Detectives determined that at the time of Leslie's passing, he was living in Jacksonville and was 24 years old. 2 months before this incident, he had attacked a young woman with developmental disabilities and attempted to assault her, but he was unsuccessful. The man was arrested, but the justice system treated his actions very leniently. Austin received no serious punishment and remained free. In addition, he had a whole series of less severe offenses on his record, including possession of illicit substances, public disorder, and more. Detectives had no doubt that he was the one behind what happened to Leslie, and they began preparing the case for court. After gathering all the necessary materials, they traveled to a Michigan prison in early 2021 to question him for the first time. The man denied his involvement, but no one was going to take his word for it. Investigators took his DNA sample to compare it directly with the biological material found on the victim. This was a necessary step in the standard procedure, and the result was expected: a perfect match. In August 2021, Austin was officially charged with involvement in Leslie's passing. Since then, detectives sought his extradition from Michigan to Florida, as the incident occurred in the latter state. This push for extradition was possibly due to one simple fact: Florida, unlike Michigan, allowed for the highest sentence, and for this, Austin could very well receive that exact punishment. The process dragged on for a year until he was finally transferred to a Florida correctional facility in September 2022. He is currently behind bars awaiting trial, and investigators have no doubt about a guilty verdict. The accused has only one option left to avoid the highest sentence. He can take a plea deal with the prosecution and provide a confession in exchange for another life term. During a press conference, investigators admitted that Austin had never been a suspect in the case and had never been questioned. According to them, the man left no clues that could have led police to him, and DNA analysis was impossible in those years. Furthermore, his DNA only entered the FBI database in 1991, 6 years after the incident. Joey also gave an interview stating that until the very end, she believed Leslie's boyfriend was the one responsible. Only after investigators found the real culprit's name did she realize that Edgar was also a victim in this whole story. He is expected to be a key witness at the trial. Leslie's mom stated that she has forgiven the man responsible for her daughter's passing. This caused great surprise among her family members, but they all respected her decision. Notably, Austin has a son named Owen, whom he has never met. Despite this, they communicated regularly via email. Journalists contacted him and learned that the son was shocked by the accusations against his father. Austin himself had written to him about it, adding that he had nothing to do with the incident. At the same time, the son was well aware of other episodes in his father's life involving the law, but continued to communicate with him. Austin's trial is scheduled to begin soon. If there are no bureaucratic delays, he could receive his verdict within a few months. Even though the truth finally came out, the victim's relatives still accuse the investigators of negligence. If they had periodically reopened the case, the culprit's identity could have been established back in the early 90s, not 30 years later. I also recommend subscribing to our Telegram channel, where we post the most interesting news from around the world daily. Thank you for watching and take care.